Grant, thanks for joining me again. It's always a pleasure to speak.
Thanks, man.
These are some really exciting times we're witnessing right now. I think it's history in the making. It may not be full disclosure, but you know, there's some overwhelming aspects of this story that I think a lot of the people in the community are ignoring. You know, it seems like a lot of people are focusing on these smaller details, and they're not looking at the big picture. You know, we have some really big players in this, like Robert Bigelow and Puthoff. If you look into what they're doing in connections to Skinwalker Ranch and the studies that were done on the BASS guys, the BASS organization, you start to see that this is a pretty amazing story. So I wanted to ask you, what are some of the ways that this story ties into Robert Bigelow and Skinwalker Ranch?
Well, Robert Bigelow is the center of the story. I mean, if you don't understand Bob Bigelow, you don't understand how the story actually worked. And that is the fact that Bob Bigelow has been working on the story for, I guess, most of his life, been very interested in the story. And the basic story is that there's $22 million put up to do investigation starting in 2007. And Bob Bigelow got the contract. He knew what was going on. He applied for the contract and got the contract. And so he's been able to gather through like the STAR teams to investigate real serious stuff where there's not lights in the sky and gather all that material. He's been able to gather all sorts of hardware material. He's been able to gather a bunch of reports. He subcontracted to the Institute for Advanced Studies in Austin, Texas with Puthoff for technology type input as to what's going on. And so he is actually the key guy, and he's done piles of stuff. He did a big investigation on crop circles. He did the big investigation on the Skinwalker Ranch. And if you look at Jeremy Corbell is probably the expert on right now on the Skinwalker Ranch. In the latest interview I saw that he did, he said basically all this ties back to the Skinwalker Ranch. And one of the things that started it was there was Bob had bought the ranch. He had brought in all sorts of experts, because that was the thing with Bob had. He had a lot of money. So when he went to investigate something like the ranch, he could bring in the top physicists, the top security people, the top, whoever. He'd bring all the top people in. He had unlimited amounts of money. He didn't have to do whatever. They could buy all the equipment they wanted. They could do whatever. And two of the people that or more, I don't know how many there was, but some defense intelligence agents were at the ranch. And when they were there, stuff happened. And it was they, apparently, according to some of the stories that were put out, they were the ones that went to Senator Harry Reid and said, you got to look into this thing. This thing's for real. And then it was Harry Reid went to the three other senators, and they got this black money and set up this program that ran from 2007 to 2012. And then, according to Elizondo, part of the stories that everybody has missed is everybody keeps saying, oh, they shut it down in 2012, especially when you listen to the skeptics. They'll say, oh, they shut it down in 2012 because they didn't find anything. It was a total waste of time. That's why they shut it down. And Elizondo says quite clearly that in 2013, there was new funding. So it didn't stop in 2012. There was new funding in 2013. We don't know where that came from, whether that came from Bigelow, whether there's another contract put out that hasn't been clarified, but they had the money. So they were able to look at all sorts of bizarre phenomena and look at all the metals. And so it all centers around Bob, and Bob basically controls all this sort of stuff. And in a 2013 interview with Bob Bigelow, he basically declared at that point, first in 2007, he basically said that he had a new partner, that he had formed a BASS organization, he had a new partner, and that he was back into investigating UFOs. And nobody at that time, George Knapp, knew who his partner was, that it was the government. And in 2009, he offers all this money to MUFON, and the people who signed the non-disclosure agreements with Bigelow knew that the government was behind the funding. So he had gathered all this material, and basically now is a private company that owns all this stuff. And in his 2013 interview, he talks about something I think is very important, and I've tried to make this point many times, and people just don't want to listen. People keep talking about disclosure. When is Santa Claus going to come? When are they going to give us the free energy? It's like a curiosity thing that we need to know what's going on, and when are they going to tell us? And what Bob Bigelow says in his 2013 interview is he's asked by George Knapp, are you in favor of disclosure? And he says, no, I'm not. He said, what we're going to get is confirmation. He uses the word confirmation. And confirmation says that we are going to put out enough to prove to people that this is real, that it's a real phenomena, and then disclosure will take place a couple of years, at least a couple of years later. So what you've had in the October 11th news conference by DeLonge, and by the December 16th video release and New York Times article, it was completely coordinated between three major news outlets by the DeLonge operation, is the fact that it's for real. And that's what I was told a year ago, that high-level officials would come out, they would identify who they are, and they would say this thing's for real. And that's exactly what happened. That is what happened on December 16th, is confirmation. It's part of confirmation. It's getting people to believe. The disclosure thing, the idea that there are bodies, that there are aliens, that there are portals, all that kind of stuff comes down the road. First, you got to get people to the point where people suddenly realize, yes, this thing's for real. Almost like this statement was made by Brennan. Brennan comes out and he does confirmation. He says, yes, I knew there was a program. Yes, the government, the Defense Department is justified to investigate whether this is a threat, because there are other enemies around the world. We have to make sure that this isn't a threat, and that it's a legitimate program. So you're getting confirmation, but you're not getting disclosure. You're not getting the details. So Bigelow is the key. If you don't understand Bigelow, you sort of missed the story, that he is the key guy. Now, when he's going to release this material, I pointed out in past updates, there are maybe as many as 74 reports, some of them up to 490 pages long. There are 24 videos. There is a bunch of hardware, and some of this hardware will be appearing at a meeting that is going to take place at the Bohemian Grove. And I know a fair bit, I'll let them run their thing. I don't want to sort of get into that, but some of this metal is going to be shown there. I am meeting with a guy on Thursday who I think was the origin of that story, and I will do a video. I will handle some of this material. I don't know if it's the same material, whether it's the same crash. Chris Bledsoe is saying it's not the same location, but I am pretty sure it is. So you have this hardware, how much he has. I think most of it was probably gathered between 2007 and 2012 from various places, or it's the metal from the implants, because Jacques Vallée, who was a good friend of Bob Bigelow, and I'm sure got funding from Bob Bigelow, had done some research. They'd done a lot of research on the implants that Roger Lear had pulled out. But for the Skinwalker Ranch, I think you should watch Jeremy Corbell, because what happened is George Knapp had followed that story for many years, but he was not really allowed to publish. He did co-author the book on Skinwalker, but a lot of the stuff he didn't publish. So there's actually one video where Jeremy Corbell actually has a box, and he's talking to George, and they've got this big box full of videotapes and files and all this kind of stuff, and he hands it over to Corbell. So Corbell is doing this documentary that is coming out on the Skinwalker Ranch to tell the sort of the inside story. That is a major story that will be part, and Corbell says it is part of this big story that broke in the New York Times. The other story that everybody's missing is the story about the experiencers. In the New York Times article, they mention that there is a program to work with experiencers. And I've known about this program for probably 2 years as well, little bits and pieces, that highly psychic people and people who have been injured by UFOs, close-up encounter people who have been injured. For example, John Burroughs was part of this program. He was investigated. Chris Bledsoe was investigated, and I heard that they had 100 people in this program, people who had various injuries from UFOs, who had this very close encounter. And what this experiencer thing, I think, is the most important part of the whole program, is the fact that these experiencers have been brought in, and the team includes Gary Nolan, who's on the Tom Delonge team. He's a geneticist from Stanford University. Hal Puthoff, who's at the Institute for Advanced Studies, who everybody knows is there, but he's working with his experiencers as well. And Kit Green, who was the former director of the Weird Desk before Ron Pandolfi. From 69 to 83, he ran the Weird Desk. These three men, along with an engineer, who I'm not sure who his name is, but an engineer at the Institute for Advanced Studies, are working with experiencers. And with the basic concept is what I've said for years, is if you want to understand the UFO phenomena, you have to look at the experiencers. Forget about lights in the sky, forget about videos, forget about hardware, forget about all that stuff. That's not going to get you anywhere. You have to talk to the experiencers, the people that are interacting with the phenomena. And there is a program, clearly a program, and there's actually just been a release of an audio tape that, and I had seen this audio tape before, but it is now leaked onto the internet, that actually involves Kit Green investigating with an intuitive, that they're actually using intuitives to get information on these people who have been injured. Very, very bizarre. They're taking this very much for real. They're treating them like ordinary people. And it's the key story is that the experiencers have the answer. They've been told things by the beings, the intelligence behind the phenomena. They have interacted. They have flown the craft. They are able to levitate. They've been trained to do different things. And those are the people you've got to watch. And there is a program inside Bob Bigelow's program that is dealing with experiencers. And I say that's the most important part of the whole story, is these experiencers. But Bob Bigelow controls everything. He controls all the films, the data. He controls all that kind of stuff. He has the money. And then you have the people like Jim Semivan, who are sort of in control of how this thing is unraveled. But Bob Bigelow has the material. Right now he's not talking, and we're waiting for them to drop the next video or release one of these reports or do something like that. But Bob Bigelow controls the entire thing. He is basically in control of all the UFO material gathered by the U.S. government from 2007 till now.
Wow, incredible. And then it's obvious that people are still looking into this, because you listen to John Alexander on a recent interview, and he's talking about going to interview Chris Bledsoe, an experiencer, and he had a sponsor. He doesn't go into any detail, but who would be John Alexander's sponsor? You have any idea?
Well, I'm just guessing. I mean, the obvious one is Jim Semivan, because Chris Bledsoe was an experiencer, and if you know the Tom Delonge story, you know Tom Delonge could care less about experiencers. He has no interest in experiencers whatsoever. He's interested in hardware. He's interested in technology. He's interested in stories, and he's a storyteller. So he's looking at interesting stories. You put these stories out. You get these trilogies. You make movies. You make books. You sell toys, and you control the story. So what happened with Chris Bledsoe is he has this experience in 2007, this awakening experience. He gets contacted by all these high-level government people who are interested in why he has such a high level of contact. And Jim Semivan is one of them that contacts Chris Bledsoe. Now, Jim Semivan, and I keep mentioning this, and it's a key part to the whole story, is Jim Semivan is an experiencer. He had the beings in his room in the early 1990s. He knows this thing's for real. He knows this is not hardware. He said, when this happened to me, my idea of reality was shattered. There does not appear to be any there. This has got to do with consciousness. This has got to do with multidimensionality. And so he friends Chris Bledsoe, because Chris Bledsoe has this high level of contact, goes to his birthday party, they're good friends. And so when the Tom Delonge thing comes along, Semivan finds out about this in 2016. He goes and contacts Tom Delonge. He says, what are you doing? Who are you dealing with? And he says, can I help you? And he basically takes over the program. He's the guy that put the New York Times, the Washington Post, Politico all to go at the same time. He's the guy that coordinated the stories. He's the brains behind this whole thing. He's the guy that's running behind. He doesn't say anything. He's on the background. He's the puppet. He's the guy that's basically making everybody, or the puppet master. He's basically making the move. So the obvious thing was when you're referring to an interview that Martin Willis did, he asked him, well, why would you go and see Chris Bledsoe? Because Chris Bledsoe is just an experiencer, and there's thousands of experiencers. Why would you go see this guy? And that's when he said, well, my sponsor told me to go see him. Now, the only person that really has close contact in the DeLonge operation with Chris Bledsoe is Jim Semivan. Jim Semivan's a friend. Now, the other possibility of the sponsor could be Bob Bigelow, because Bob Bigelow might be financing this work with experiencers, because in this tape that has been released, when you finally hear this tape, Kit Green is on there, and Kit Green says, my sponsor wants to know this. My sponsor wants to know that. Now, I don't think that would be Jim Semivan. That sounds more like Bob Bigelow, but it may be Jim Semivan. But again, we're just guessing. The only reason I say Jim Semivan may be the sponsor is because he's the only one that really had this very close contact with Chris Bledsoe, and he would have said, go and see this guy. In fact, that's why Chris Bledsoe got involved with Tom DeLonge. According to what I heard, he went to Tom DeLonge, who had no interest in experiencers, and he said to Tom DeLonge, he said, I've got this guy in North Carolina. It's an important story. I want you to do this story. I want you to take it to Hollywood, and I want you to make this happen. I want him to tell Chris Bledsoe's story. So he's been this big-time supporter, and that would make sense that Semivan would say to John Alexander and everybody else on the team, you got to go and talk to this Chris Bledsoe guy. He's a key guy. You got to know what he's about. You got to hear his story. You got to talk to him. So that's just my guess. But again, that's just a guess as to who the sponsor is.
Seems like a pretty good one. I agree with you a bit on that. We've got some neat comments by George Knapp, too, on Phenomenon Radio with Linda Moulton Howe and John Burroughs. He was talking about ongoing studies at Skinwalker Ranch and about military personnel who were there and some serious guys who did a lot of studies on these guys. And they had some psychological effects, physical effects that were analyzed. And he said that there's a pattern that emerges in the data that is very disturbing. He's kind of cryptic in what he says. And then John Burroughs asked him, he says, in Annie Jacobson's book, The Phenomenon, she mentions a study by Kip Green and Gary Nolan. Is this the study that you're talking about, George? And he kind of steps around and he says, well, I'll have to think about how to answer that. Do you have any insight on that? Do you know what that study is?
That's the study I'm talking about. That is the study I've known about for 2 years. It's a study of and it's a good study. It's what we should be doing. And Kit Green talked to Annie Jacobson about this. There's actually an article which I can maybe we can attach to this. There's actually an article written. He also contacted a UFO researcher who wrote up an article on this whole thing. And this is basically the idea that you can actually get quantitative material. So you can actually study the DNA. That's what Nolan's objective is. He's there to, and what Nolan says is that everything that happens in your life is recorded in your DNA. So when you have a cold, a flu, trauma, whatever, it's recorded in DNA. So what they're doing is they're looking at the experiencer's DNA, and they're trying to see, is there a common pattern in the DNA? One of the stories I heard was that there was a DNA marker that was there from birth in both highly psychic people and in experiencers. Now, that's just what I heard. It may not be, we haven't seen the final results or whatever, but that's what they're looking at. They're looking at the DNA, and they're also looking at the brain patterns. And when you see this leaked audio that's out now, that's what they're talking about, is this brain pattern. And what they're trying to see is consciousness non-local? How does this actually work? How do we actually... is an experiencer different than everybody else? How is Chris Bledsoe able to contact these aliens? Is his brain different than everybody else? And what it was discovered, according to Annie Jacobson, was that the highly psychic people and the people who've had close encounters with UFOs, these experiencer type people, both have what is called, they refer to it as an antenna. It's a brain pattern that they refer to as the antenna. So that's when I asked Chris Bledsoe. I said, well, when you were in this test thing, when they were testing you, did you ever hear the word antenna? And he said, yeah, I heard the word. And it's critically important because, as you know, I study the Rama group very closely. This group of contactees from South America who are able to do these program sightings where they have people who are called antennas. In each of these Rama groups, there's a person who's an antenna who does automatic writing. And that person will tell you not only where the sighting will take place, but to the minute when that sighting will take place. And I was in California with Katerina Castillo and with Desta Barnaby, and we saw this happen. 9:33, there was 2 antennas. One was a PhD person trained in psychology, Columbia University with a PhD, who was one of the antennas, showed me the actual message, 9:33, and at 9:33, this event did take place over our heads. Now, it wasn't, aliens and flying saucers or whatever, but it was a very, very bizarre event. So this is the significant part, is that there is this idea that they picked up, and you can actually now record this. So it's not some experiencer said, because that's basically when you get the experiencers, what the skeptics will say, and the hardcore ufologists will say was, oh, we're looking for nuts and bolts. We need some rational, analytical, left brain thinking. We don't care what experiencers say. They just believe that they're experiencing this stuff. Now we're going to get a different situation where it's not just an experiencer telling an anecdotal story. Now we have actual DNA where you can actually show a commonality between all these people inside their DNA and inside their brain patterns. That is the study. That is the big thing. That's the one I say people got to watch. It's this experiencer study that's going on inside, the one that Knapp really didn't want to get into, for whatever reason. But there is this study going on, and it's been going on for quite a while. And Kit Green has talked about this thing with other researchers. And the one experiment that I know that was planned was a thing where they were going to put 2 psychic people, 2 people who were able to send messages from one to the other. They were going to put one in an MRI here, one in China. Now it may be here and in Israel. But what they're going to do is put 2 highly psychic people in an MRI. The one would send a message or a signal or a picture to the other one, and the other person would receive it, and they would watch the MRI to see whether when the message was sent and received, was that instantaneously, which would mean did it bypass time and space? Is it non-local? Is consciousness non-local? That's a critically important experiment. As far as I know, that experiment hasn't been done, but that's the kind of stuff that this study is looking at. And that to me is the most important thing, because as I've said for many, many years already, I've said that if you want to understand the UFO phenomena, if you want to understand what's really going on, what's behind this, the key to the whole thing is consciousness. And Tom DeLonge said that. Tom DeLonge said that when he brought up consciousness at Skunkworks, that's all the head scientists wanted to talk about. Ben Rich brought up skunk consciousness. The Canadian government in 1950, in a top secret memo, brought up consciousness. Eric Walker brought up consciousness. John Alexander has brought up consciousness. Jim Semivan said this has got to do with consciousness. This has got to do with multidimensionality. So this experiencer study dealing with the consciousness of these experiencers, and I've heard there's over 100 people in this program now, is the most important part of all the stuff that Puthoff has. People might be interested in seeing the videos or the the hardware, whatever. But that stuff's all very sort of controversial. Like the video that you mentioned at the beginning, there is a very big controversy around these videos with the noise on, and the fact that one was released in 2007. So you have the one in 2007 has no noise on it. The one that was released by Tom DeLonge, the same video, has noise in the background. And the story was that the pilot left his mic open, which doesn't make any sense, because a pilot's not gonna, they don't turn a switch on and leave the mic on. It's a push button thing where they just talk. And so that one has noise. And then what we've learned now, maybe an update that some people don't know, is that the gimbal one, the one with the guys talking in the background, was not a Nimitz. It did not happen on the West Coast. It actually happened on the East Coast of the United States, and it happened in 2015. So that is now sort of been public. And in that one as well, you have the same noise in the background. What I say is that videos really don't prove anything. It's not getting us anywhere. It goes down the same rat holes. It always goes down. Is we argue about, is this right? Is that right? Is it a hoax? Is it not a hoax? And it doesn't get you anywhere, because anybody can hoax a video. It's like today, pictures and videos really don't count for anything. But when you get to this experiencer thing, that's when I think you're going to get some actual evidence that actually starts to prove what's actually going on. Because these people, as some of the YouTube videos that I've released on Whitehouse UFO YouTube, we have just released one that actually talks about a technology that is used to look at veins under the skin. And I identified two experiencers. One was Steve Boucher, who saw this technology in 1972 on board a craft. And the other one was Susie Hansen, who saw this technology, more sophisticated than what we've got. But now this technology's out. And it was exactly what these people described. So that's the importance of the experiencer, is they're being shown technology. Susie Hansen said she saw touch screens years before they appeared. She saw all this kind of stuff, screens that you could just roll up into like a little sort of a ball and pull them out, and the screen would be there. All the kind of stuff that we see now, she saw a lot of this stuff like 20 or 30 years ago during her abduction experiences. The experiencers are extremely important. They're being shown stuff, they're being given plans, they're being told what's going on. That is the place where people should be. And I applaud Bob Bigelow for doing this study on the experiencers.
Great job, Grant. I think you can end it there. That's a good one.